constraints beyond my control, I wasn't able to do that extent of research, so I had to completely throw that idea out the window yesterday, and I found a lesson online that was titled just the election sermon, and for some reason I'm just terrible with names this morning. I think his name was Gary Hamrick, I think was the guy who put it together, but he did a lesson on the 2016 election, and he made some good points, and so I kind of took some of the points that he made and then just kind of built my own lesson, threw in some additional scriptures and a couple of my own anecdotes. But so that's kind of where this came from, and so hopefully this won't be an hour-long lesson like the last time I spoke. All right. So, now I did mention, actually before I go to the next slide, I did mention about the examination of the political structures. So something to keep in mind throughout this lesson, because I'm probably only going to bring it up like once or twice again, think about the structure that Christ lived in during his time. It was something that Daryl mentioned in the adult class. The Roman government and everything that they allowed and tolerated and advocated, the things that their taxes went towards paying, the type of culture that the civilization of that time went through, and kind of think about how Christ handled living in those times and how we should handle living in our time. So moving forward, basically when it comes to election time, we have three general options. We can not vote. We have every right to choose to not vote. We can vote based on the candidate, purely on the candidate. This is a good person that I feel would be a good fit and a good leader for our country. Or we can vote based on the platform. I might not necessarily like the person, but the platform that they're running on is more in line with what I think is best for the nation. And so I'm not here to try to change your mind. If you are already dead set on who you're going to vote for and what you're going to do and how you're going to treat this election, that's your conscience. I mean, I'm not going to try to talk you out of anything. It's absolutely up to you. This is that one time every 4 years when you actually do have a little bit of say in what you feel is best for our country. And even if whoever you vote for, or whatever you choose to do, even if the opposite kind of happens, at least there is a record of one more vote for whatever your belief is. So even if you don't have the quote-unquote winning vote, at least there's still a track that, well, we had X number of people that feel this way about policies in our nation. Even if it's not the majority, there's still a record of, hey, there are people that do feel this way. And so I'm not here to try to change your mind, just to kind of examine these options. And one interesting story is that I was speaking with a friend from Fairmont, who he's one of the preachers that kind of preaches on a rotation up in that area. And he said that he talked with a person who every election, this was an older gentleman, he always votes for the person who he feels is the absolute worst candidate. And he votes for the person who he feels will absolutely destroy this country and ruin it the fastest. And the reason is because that individual feels that if you, the worse that a country is doing, the more growth the church has. So the more destabilized the country is, the more support that the church will have. Historically speaking, he's not entirely wrong. I'd be hesitant to vote myself with that mindset. I'm not advocating that, but it just goes to show you that who you vote for isn't always an indication of your faith. So first, you can abstain. You can just not vote. Absolutely do not have to vote. And there's this mindset, especially for this election and even the last two elections to an extent, that we're just voting for the lesser of two evils. And voting for one is still a vote for evil, so I'm just not going to vote. And if that's how you feel, then that's how you feel. However, I would like to kind of point out something, that when we're voting in our elections, we are always choosing the lesser of two evils. It doesn't matter how righteous you feel one candidate is, you're still voting for the lesser of two evils because none of the candidates are Christ. None of them are perfect. None of them have ever lived perfect lives. And I would even venture to say, as sad as it is to say, that if Christ himself came down to the United States to run in a presidential election, there would be Christians who do not vote for him because he doesn't represent their ideas of Christianity. Matthew chapter 7, verse 22, on that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. At face value, these are Christians who say they're working for Christ. But if Christ himself were to come and present all of his glory, there would be a discrepancy there. And so it's just a sad thought that they might not actually vote for Christ because they're actually working lawlessness. And they're not going to realize that until they meet Christ. Now, I want to kind of replace this mindset of a lesser of two evils or voting is evil and all this stuff with this mindset. If you don't vote, it's not a protest against the system. It's not a protest against one candidate or one party. It's actually a surrender. Because in this nation, we do have that right to vote. No one can stop you from it. That is how we elect our leaders. And to not voice a say in that, you're just kind of surrendering your fate to the world. A quote from Wayne Grudem, who is, I don't know exactly what his title was, but he was some level of faith consultant for the Trump campaign, but then he left the Trump campaign because of differences of opinion or something. But a quote from him that he just put out within the past week or two says, I am deeply reluctant to simply walk away from the process in disgust or vote for a write-in candidate in order to protest against both parties. If all the Christians in the country decide not to vote for either candidate, our ruler will be chosen entirely by non-Christians, many of whom will increasingly use the immense power of government to promote evil, to silence Christians and oppose Christian values in every area of life. And that's kind of a scary thought. That if every Christian in this country says, well, I can't vote for either one because voting for them will just hurt my conscience, then we're basically saying, okay, we want every non-Christian to dictate how the country's ran. That's kind of a scary thought, how quickly that could go in a bad direction. Now, if you're like that gentleman from up in Fairmont, maybe that's exactly what you want to see. So maybe he's just not going to vote in this election. I don't know. But I think that we have a moral obligation to do the most good that is practically possible. See, we kind of take it for granted, the election process that we have here. We kind of don't realize how much of a blessing that really is. Because I guarantee you that if Christians who are living and being persecuted in countries such as China and North Korea and throughout the Middle East, I guarantee you that if they were given the opportunity to vote for their leaders, and they have one leader who is a strong advocate for nationalizing atheism or Islam, or fill in the blank, and is turning a blind eye towards persecutions against Christians. And then candidate 2 is somebody who still firmly believes in atheism or Islam, but will at least tolerate the existence of other faiths in their country and will work to limit persecutions. Do you not think they very happily choose the lesser of two evils there? Obviously, neither one is a Christian choice, but there's an obligation to do the most good that is practically possible. And so we kind of take our election process for granted because it's just something that we've been, all of us here, because none of us are older than like 250, 300 years old. We've all been born and raised in this system. It might not be perfect, but it's what we have, and I think we do take it for granted too often. So, that covers not voting. So next, we have to kind of look at the person. Maybe we want to vote based on the person. And now I have said this a few times, and I'll say it again. I would venture to say that there's not a single president in the history of all of our presidents that we've had that could go through the election process today and escape the campaign process and escape the election process and come out being viewed as a good person. I don't care. Even your George Washingtons and Abe Lincolns, no matter how much we like to honor them and glorify them, in the fast-paced world of communications today with the technology that we have and all the cell phones and wiretapping and spying that's going on between parties and candidates, I mean, any little thing that a person does wrong, there's going to be a record of it somewhere. There's going to be somebody who saw it or heard it who's going to come out against it. I guarantee you that at some point in George Washington's life, he probably said mean things. He was a slave owner. Now, from the records that we have, he was one of the quote-unquote good slave owners. He treated his slaves properly. It was basically a very much employer-employee type of status. He had slaves. I'm sure at some point he probably had a yellow slave. I'm sure at some point he probably talked poorly about people of different minorities, maybe a gender different from his. The point being that history has a way of remembering only the good qualities in those that we like to deem as heroes. And so I don't think that there's a single president that would be considered good in today's election process. Well, that covers that. I guess I thought that point was already up there. We're inherently flawed. Everybody makes mistakes. All right, second point, hypocrisy. It's everywhere. It's on the sports field, it's in the church, it's in politics, it's absolutely everywhere because, point one, we're inherently flawed. We're going to make mistakes. But I will say, just to make a quick note, there are times when a person can legitimately change their mind on an issue, especially in the political spectrum, because they might start off running on one platform, but the deeper in the process they get, they're going to be more aware of the financial, the economic, the international relations, and the globalism, and maybe they're going to realize, oh, my initial stance isn't exactly feasible. I'm going to have to change my mind now. So I'm saying it's probably rare in politics that there is a legitimate change of mind, and they probably do just change their mind just to get more votes. But there are cases where there can be a legitimate change of opinion. So I wouldn't just absolutely destroy someone because they changed their mind on something. But do we use this same type of standard for cheering for sports teams though? This oh, he's a hypocrite. I can't like that person. She's a hypocrite. I can't associate with her. This isn't the best of example for me because I'm really not a diehard sports fan anymore. This season, I absolutely have no qualms with rooting against the Dolphins in every game, even though they've been my favorite team since birth, because of some of the choices some of their players and coaches are making in the game that delves into a social political spectrum. But most people that are diehard fans, just because there's that one boneheaded player on their team, they're not going to just be like, oh, I just can't see Adam rooting against the Ravens just because one of their players may or may not have killed a person. Just saying. Great little reference. So, we don't treat sports teams that way. Okay? Well, what about churches? I'd say a lot of people treat the church that way. I'd say that is one of the largest reasons for the growth of atheism and for at the same time, the growth of denominationalism in the country is because they're like, oh, well, so-and-so goes to that church, and I just know what type of person that is, and if they go to church, then there's no way I'm going to go to church. Because if that's what being a Christian's like, I want none of it. That's kind of the atheist viewpoint. Well, let's look at a denominational viewpoint. Oh, well, they go to that church. Well, I told them what type of beliefs that church has. I'm not going to go anywhere near there. I think I'm going to try out this church. Kind of misses the point that there's only one church, but you can kind of get the mindset and how this level of hypocrisy and this standard at which we judge people kind of affects the way we view things. Right or wrong, it's just kind of the way it works. So we can't really base our opinions on the person. I'm not saying it's not possible to vote for a candidate purely on their character, but especially in this election, I don't think it's really feasible to base your vote off of a person. That's just my opinion. All right, so that brings us to the platform. Well, there's still no platform that is perfect. And the reason that there's no platform that's perfect is because they're still just man-made inventions. The country didn't start out with parties. It was something that was implemented throughout the political process with good intentions to make the process easier and to make campaigning easier. But I think most people would agree that there is flaws with our platform system. That being said, there are still certain parties that are kind of more in line with my personal belief, and I think that there are certain parties out there that are more in line with a a Christian stance. Even though every party in existence today is made up of people with a 21st century American mindset, which is at times very egotistical and short-sighted, the platform itself still holds true to certain principles and certain values. And judging by a platform, looking at a platform, can kind of give us a better idea of the type of leadership priorities that members of that platform will have when they are in office, and the type of people that that person will most frequently associate with and will consult with when making their decisions. So maybe looking at a platform isn't such a bad idea. Now, I don't want the entire lesson to be just purely on examining politics, but because we're looking at platforms, I'm just going to throw a couple issues. All I'm going to do is just a direct quote from the platform's website for like their stance on an issue. I'm just going to do a little back forth, just 3 topics. I'm not going to say which party it's coming from, but when we read these quotes, just kind of think, is that a Christian mindset or not? And I will go ahead and say that there's 2 of them I think will be pretty clear. One of them, I think there's a little bit of room for debate. I think there is still a good answer. I think there is one that is still more in line with Christian values, but it can be a little bit debated. So let's just take a look at those. Abortion. So party A. We believe that every woman should have access to quality reproductive healthcare services, including a safe and legal abortion. We will seek to overturn federal and state laws and policies that impede a woman's access to abortion. Party B. We support a human life amendment to the Constitution and legislation to make clear that, the 14th Amendment's protections apply to children before birth. American taxpayers should not be forced to fund abortion. Social issues. One party says traditional marriage and family based on marriage between one man and one woman is the foundation for a free society. We believe the federal government, specifically the IRS, is constitutionally prohibited from policing or censoring speech-based religious convictions or beliefs. Second party, we applaud last year's decision by the Supreme Court that recognized that LGBT people have the right to marry. We will support sexual and reproductive health and rights around the globe. The last issue, education. One party, working families should not have to pay any tuition to go to public colleges and universities. We will also make community college free. We oppose for-profit charter schools focused on making a profit off of public resources. Next party. We support options for learning, including homeschooling, private or parochial schools, magnet schools, charter schools, online learning, and early college high schools. We renew our call for replacing family planning programs for teens with sexual risk avoidance education that sets abstinence until marriage as a responsible and respected standard of behavior. So those are just a few of the platform issues, just quotes from their conventions, from their websites, however you want to term that. So where does that leave us? What are God's expectations for Christians? Well, first, I let off with the flag, because I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a very proud citizen. I like to consider myself patriotic to the point that I did make the choice to serve in the military, because I do believe in the freedoms that the country has, and I believe that those freedoms are worth defending. That being said, I'm also a citizen in heaven. That's where my citizenship lies. And to kind of steal a little tagline from some Army marketing, it's bad, might have been Marine marketing, I don't remember now. Answering the call. Maybe you guys have seen the commercials. We have a higher calling that transcends that of being an American citizen. We have to be basically citizens of Christ, citizens in heaven. That should be where our calling priorities are. And so, with that, how are we supposed to act as heavenly citizens? One passage we actually mentioned this briefly in the adult class, comes from Matthew chapter 5. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This kind of shows the way that we are supposed to conduct ourselves. We're supposed to conduct ourselves in such a way that we would be a good light for for the world, that we would add flavor, a good flavor to the world. And then on down in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you always till the end of the age. To say, go therefore and make disciples of Great Britain, of China, of the Gentiles, of the pagans, of a Republican United States, of a Democrat-ran United States. That says all nations, regardless of what government structure, what man-made institution is governing that location. We're to be disciples to all nations. So, if we're going to be discipling to all nations, we're going to be answering that call. What happens after that? Well, a little bit more expectations here. Romans 13, verse 1, really just the whole chapter, but the kind of heart of it is here. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Titus 3, verse 1, remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work. 1 Peter chapter 2, we read this one this morning. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. Once again, these are words of Christ's apostles in the first century in a Rome which openly persecuted Christians to the point that there were some gruesome deaths, especially from the apostles. And they were still supposed to be subject to the human institutions of the time. So that kind of makes living today, even though there might be some people that we disagree with in our country, maybe even some leaders that we disagree with. I haven't seen a Christian be crucified in the United States. Haven't heard of that happening. Just kind of something to think about when we're talking about humility and servitude to a government, even if we don't necessarily agree with everything it says or does. But how? But how are we to serve in such a way that we can be that light, that we can kind of, even though the government might disagree with Christian principles, that we can still act in such a way that doesn't disrespect our obligation to honor them, but still live for Christ in the face of a disagreeable government? Well, 1 Timothy 2, I'd like to start out by saying, first of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. We got to pray. That's it. That's the first step, is just to pray. Pray for ourselves, pray for our leaders, pray for the nation. You know, the last time I spoke here, the lesson was on prayer and the benefits of prayer. And actually, I had a friend from work ask me just the other day. He's not a Christian. He claims to be an atheist, and he had a question about prayer in relation to meditation. He's like, I've been kind of doing some research into meditation. From what I read about meditation, it sounds kind of like what Christians talk about when they say prayer. And I'm like, you're exactly right. It's very similar. The mindset is more spiritual for prayer, but it has the exact same benefits. But furthermore, not just personal benefits. You know, we do know that God answers prayers. We do know that He does take care of us. And even in the moment, if it doesn't seem like we're getting what we want, we know that truly all things do work together for good. Secondly, I'd say we just have to live a Christian life and not be conformed to this world. Those passages from the last screen, from Romans, Titus, and 1 Peter, if you go back and you read the context, instead of just that one or two verses that I pulled out, if you read the full context of that verse, you'll see that both before that statement about obeying, a man-made institution, and after that statement is made, you'll see a call to do good, to help others, to basically just live a Christ-like life. And so I'm just going to call out one for sake of time, Romans chapter 12. I know it's kind of long, so I'm just going to kind of read fast, I guess. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. It does not matter where you live or what government you live under. If you do these things, you're going to be doing right in the sight of God. And you're going to be doing it in such a way that just maybe whoever's in charge at that time might take note of it. Like, wow, these Christians, pretty good people. Even when they're being persecuted. Even when they're being tormented. Even when we're doing things to take away their rights. They're still being good. They're still treating people with the type of love that Christ taught. You know, maybe there is something more to this Christianity thing. Maybe it's something we should look into. You never know the impact you can have by just setting a good example. In Galatians 5, against such things there is no law. At the point that a man-made government says you can't be nice to someone, it's time to break that law. 1 Peter chapter 2, again verse 12. They may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Once again, just by doing good, you can set a Christ-like example so that others can see Christ living in you, and they may in turn glorify God with you one day. I would say that, talking about the light of the earth, I would say that the light that refuses to go out, regardless of how heavy the darkness is weighing on it, that's the light that's going to attract others to the hope that is within us. But to conclude, to wrap this up, there is one final authority that we are subject to. John chapter 18, verse 36, Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. Matthew 28, Jesus came and said to them, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. In Acts 5:29, but Peter and the apostles answered, We must obey God rather than men. So when all else fails, you're doing everything right, but if you live in a nation where Christianity is not allowed, such as North Korea or China, where China's declared national religion is atheism and you cannot practice Christianity openly. If you find yourselves in such a situation, just remember these verses. That it doesn't matter what man's institution says, Christ still has the final authority. And in times where man's law conflicts with God's law, that is when we need to be breaking man's law in order to remain subjects and servants to Christ, who does have that final authority. And part of that is being obedient. And there's a whole list of verses I thought about including here. But we must obey God rather than men. And part of that obedience is repenting of our past sins. Part of that obedience is putting on Christ in the waters of baptism. Part of being obedient to God is living a righteous life like He has commanded us. Now, if there's anyone here this morning that maybe you have yet to be obedient to God and would like to be, or maybe you already have, and Christ is your Savior, and you're trying to serve God, but you're struggling with your faith, that there are maybe temptations in your life that's really tugging at your heart and slowly pulling you away, we would ask and hope and pray that you not waste the opportunity of today, and that you would let your needs be known, made known. Wow, I butchered that. let your needs be known, something like that. You get the point. Anyway, Mr. You would come forward as we stand and sing.